So welcome back, everyone. And now back over to David Lipsey. Thank you, David.
Jeanette, thanks so much. And Jason, welcome to the Festival of Damn. Our next session features Jason Lambert, who's the Executive Director of Content Licensing for Sony Pictures Entertainment. Having the opportunity to sit at the helm of a repository that not only looks backwards in time, but prepares every day for new content that's being created, that defines and redefines what content is of interest and how to find it, has been something that Jason's become quite a master of. And I'm so thrilled and appreciative, Jason, of your time today to share your presentation about Sony Pictures content licensing operation and your continual and persistently innovative approach to it. Welcome to the festival.
Oh, you are so kind. Thank you. And it's great to be presenting to all of you today virtually and coming into your homes if you're at home, or into your offices if you're in your offices. I look forward to the time when we can all be together again in the future. But that time is not now. For now, we are all working from home, and I look forward to sharing this with you here. So content licensing. I thought I would share a little bit today about what our business has been doing within the world of DAM, and more specifically, taxonomy, ontology, and AI, how we're using AI to improve our taxonomy and improve the metadata within our systems. Will help. There we go. Probably helps to give a little bit of background about my role at Sony and the business that I manage within the studio. We have three basic core properties that we license out. We've got our film clips that you can see there on the far right, and that's clips that come from our feature films and television programs, primarily feature films. So if you want the "You Had Me at Hello" or you want the "You Talking to Me" clip, we're licensing that out to other businesses. If you want posters and stills, they're in the middle of behind the scenes photography, or a photo that was taken on set, or even just a portrait photograph of maybe Tom Hanks for some of the marketing for one of our films, we can license that. But our business of content licensing actually started with our stock footage business. And stock footage is basically, it's all the generic, easily repurposed material that can exist within a feature film or television program. So the video's not playing, apologize for that, but it would be things like aerials of New York City, or a bear walking along the shore of a lake, or maybe a motorcycle jumping over a cliff. We like to think of this as the recycling business for Sony Pictures, where we're taking material that got originally filmed for one purpose, and now it's being reused in another film. So you're making a television show that takes place in New York City, but you can't send a crew to New York City. We can't send crews anywhere right now with work from home. So you can repurpose footage of New York City from maybe Spider-Man in your films. So that's the general idea. And as you can imagine, we have collected a lot of material over a lot of time from a lot of different sources that make up this content library. So when I first started at Sony Pictures about 18 years ago now, all of our material was either on film or it was on videotape. And there might have been some index cards that had a few pieces of metadata printed on them, maybe even a small frame of print that was cut out that was put into that index card so you could hold it up to the light and see what that shot looked like. But there wasn't a lot of data, and it was really more like a filing index card system where you could sort of flip through and say, I'm looking for elephants, and here's a folder of elephant material, and hold those cards up and see what you had. Or maybe that card would link you back to a videotape. We got a little bit more digital, and so our files were starting to come to us not just on tape or on these physical film assets, but maybe they were coming over as digital files, but there still wasn't a lot of data that existed around all of this material. And if you can't find something, then you can't license it. If there's nothing to search for, then there's no way that you can connect your clients to the assets that they're looking for, as I know all of you are well familiar. So we knew we had a problem. initially, we knew we needed to get away from a physical file card sharing system, moving to a digital database where we could capture all of this information and make it a lot more easy to search, not just internally for us, but for all of our clients internally and eventually externally. And we knew we were going to need a lot of additional metadata that we were going to be able to attach to those assets that we had found in the library that had been collected over time. And so we started building out this repository of stock footage. And this was quite some time ago. And in all candor, we weren't exactly sure what it was that we needed to capture about these clips. We weren't exactly sure who our customers were going to ultimately be. We knew that other television programs and other feature films could certainly use this material, but we also hypothesized based on business analysts that, you know, advertisers and web producers and all sorts of people, different types of customers would be able to use this content. So we just started capturing the data that we thought would be most valuable. And we started using editorial teams to start editing those clips down and to further refine the process, and then even reaching out to folks in our post-production departments who might be able to assist us with that. And as you can imagine, and maybe some of you have experienced, when you start having multiple groups that are creating data without controlled vocabulary or really strict controls around a process, the data starts to get a little bit unwieldy. And you start to have a little bit of variance between how one group might catalog something and how another group might catalog something. We saw this as a problem, but it was actually a good problem because we were finding that more and more groups within our studio wanted to participate in the building up of the library because they were finding so much value. So the television productions that would normally be the source from which we would pull our stock material, they started capturing the stock on their own and delivering it to us. And of course, they had their own idea of what metadata to tag. And even when we would give them a strict structure to follow and some forms that they could plug into and try to control that vocabulary, it was still difficult. Even within that controlled vocabulary, people would have different ideas about what a thing was or what was most important to a shot. The same thing happened when we expanded to our feature departments, where they started logging their own material and providing it, all feeding into a single repository, but starting to see all of this variability between the terms that were used, and it was really affecting how we were searching internally. What we found when we would do a search internally, a customer would call us, is we were familiar enough with our data that we could sort of connect the dots on our own. We could understand that if somebody was asking us for dachshunds, that we could do a search for wiener dog as well as dachshund and make sure that we got both of those terms. But when we started moving our content to an outward-facing, available to all the world, searchable database and platform where any customer could go in and search our data, we knew that expecting our customer to make those connections on their own was not going to be ideal, that we needed to find some way of connecting the dots for them. And that's where taxonomy really started to play a role, but it was a pretty unwieldy problem, right? We've had data that has been collected over 16 years from a myriad of different content creators, and even our own standards internally have evolved over time. So how do we start to bring that together? So we developed a plan for building a business-specific taxonomy. The first thing was to really assess the situation, looking at all of the keywords that had ever been used across any of our assets. And we're getting close to about 200,000 different stock footage assets over the last 50 years that exist within our repository. We also had free text descriptions. We had the search histories from when we had an outward-facing site previously, and from all of our internal searches that we have collected over time in our customer management system. And then we spoke to our customers, asking them, what is the experience that you're looking for on a website today that would keep us in line with what we see from our competitors, like a Getty Images or a Shutterstock. So then we started looking for solutions, pretty obvious. we wanted to figure out how we could build a thesaurus that would connect all of our terms together without having to start from scratch. So we looked at some Getty thesauruses. We looked at the thesaurus for graphic materials from the Library of Congress, which ended up being a great fit. And it's probably good to pause here and just talk a little bit about what the value of that thesaurus and that taxonomy actually brings. So I used the example of dachshund and wiener dog before. What we wanted to do was build out the relationships between all of the terms that existed within our database, so that when we started searching for something, you didn't have to know what term a cataloger had used to call a thing a thing. You could allow the searcher to use whatever term was natural to them and let the system that we were using connect the dots for them. So you can think of that in terms of locations pretty easily. So the location of New York City and NYC mean the same thing to a lot of people, but somebody who's searching might type NYC because that's natural and logical to them, and someone else might type New York City. Somebody else might actually type Manhattan, or they might specifically be looking for an area of Manhattan like Brooklyn or the Bronx, or even a more discrete neighborhood. The taxonomy that we wanted to build, both for locations and for all of our terms, allows us to connect the dots between those terms, tell our systems that NYC and New York City mean the same thing, and that something like Manhattan or the Bronx or the Brooklyn is actually a child of New York City, NYC. And New York City is a child of New York State, and New York State is a child of the United States of America. So we wanted to be able to pull all of our keywords into an organized structure like that, but we didn't want to have to start from scratch. So we looked at other solutions in the marketplace that had already started to do some of that work that we could customize. We then turned to AI. And this was really the big moment of success for us and the process in being able to use natural language processing to analyze the text data records that we had, prioritize how to pull data out of and pull terms out of those records, and then organize all of those terms that were pulled out into this structured taxonomy that we had created. And so that workflow looked a little something like this. So we had the thesaurus for graphic materials that was a starting point, but we had 4,000 of our own keywords plus some locations on the side that we wanted to integrate into that thesaurus that already existed. So we used Nicole Cotham on my team, who is an exceptional librarian, to really do the hard work of organizing the terms that we had and making them fit within a structure that would be scalable and extensible over the long term as new stock footage keywords were added to our database. We then, once we had built that taxonomy, we relied on the cognitive AI to start to extract that. So we would feed it all the records from whether it was our tape records, our film records, our digital records, just text records that we had, using Cogito, which is an expert system service to run the natural language processing and then extract all of those key terms from all of the text records that existed. We then had an iterative process where we could look at the results as we did the first 100 terms or the first 500 terms and make sure that what we were seeing from the AI was matching what we expected to come out of the AI, that the results that it was extracting were making sense for the type of searches that we wanted to do. And where we ended up was taxonomy that now has over 10,000 terms, that has ontology-like relationships, that allows us to disambiguate between different terms that share similarity, the ability to weight terms depending on how they are used in the text record. So if a term is used over and over again in a description field, for example, or if it's used as a primary keyword from one of the data inputs, we can add weight to that term so that it shows up higher in our search results. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the parent-child relationships between terms, so that we no longer have to tag a clip that has a dachshund in it with the term dog, because we know that there's a hierarchical parent-child relationship between dachshunds and dogs. If you haven't guessed, I have a dachshund, and I like to use that, that example in my presentations. So now we have consistent clip tagging. We've got better topics for navigation, which will be rolling into our site soon, where you can actually drill down into that hierarchy. It's helping us with content creation, so it's making our cataloging process easier because the controls can actually be put into place on both the front end and on the back end as wild terms come into the ecosystem. That, of course, makes us more efficient, and having a better taxonomy makes the content imminently more discoverable. And so we circled back to what is our process for doing this. The end of that was to be able to realize some of the results. And I've taken some screenshots from our site that has just gone live. SonyPicturesStockFootage.com went live last month. You're welcome to turn to it. But I've got some screenshots that kind of illustrate what it is that we were hoping to achieve. So here is what the site looks like. And here is a search that I had run before we implemented this taxonomy into our database, where I was searching for the term tuxedo, pulled a bunch of cute shots of extras from Prom Night, I think is the movie here. We found about 180 shots for doing a search for tuxedo. And then I did a separate search, there you go. I did a separate search for black tie and got a different number of results, only got 32 results for black tie. But those terms, they are synonymous, they mean the same thing. And the taxonomy that we implemented allowed us not only to extract tuxedo from text records that were coming in that may have been created over time and didn't adhere to the standards that we have today, but it could also connect the dots between the term tuxedo and black tie, so that when we run a search now for tuxedo, we start to see more results than the 180 results we saw in the first place. And we see some of those results from black tie starting to show up in our clip results, where it's got folks in this audience of a ballet, I think, that are in a black tie in a tuxedo. This is the type of thing that our customers were asking for, and this is the type of thing that allows all of our researchers, or whether they're internal or external, a better view into all of the content that is available, so that they can start to find a way to connect the dots between what it is they're looking for a project and what it is that they are finding on our website. And so when I gave this presentation once before internally, and the question I got was, what's next? So I thought I would add, what's next? Content recommendation. Now that we have this taxonomy in place and then the initial integration with our website, we can start to connect the dots with content recommendation to leverage, to basically push out similar clips through a similarity score based on the terms that are applied to or extracted for a particular clip. We can link this to a semantic knowledge graph, for those of you who are familiar with semantic knowledge graphs. And then, of course, we can extend this, this strategic AI. We have focused on our stock footage database. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we have two other different types of product that we license out, the film clips and the stills and posters. And those have similar taxonomies to what we have used for the stock footage, but they also have some differences. But we now have the building blocks to start to extend that out so that we can connect the dots, not just between a scene, not just to find a scene in a movie that might have a dog or a location or a specific line of dialogue, but even connect the dots between movies so that we can find scenes that are similar in movie A and connect them to a scene in movie B, which has tremendous use, not just for our licensing business, but for the studio at large. And I like to close all of my presentations with this quote that I stumbled upon quite a long time ago. If you add a little to a little and you do this often, soon the little will become great. When we started this library, we only had a few thousand shots, and we just started doing something, cataloging something. When we realized we had a problem with our taxonomy that we needed to build upon, We knew it was a big problem to solve, but we also knew that just by getting started on it, we were going to be able to eventually get to the point where we had success and had solutions that were going to work. So for those of you who look at the end result and think, wow, I'm not quite sure how I could ever get there, I say to you simply start. Start by doing a little bit. Do a little, do a little. If you keep doing a little, soon that little will become great. Thank you.
Jason, thanks so much. And I'm going to keep that quote taped on my monitor where I have all my projects around my office.
That's great.
And certainly my favorite question, what's next? I think one of the unendingly interesting aspects of digital asset management is that we can all, no matter how many littles we've done to make a something, can ask that question about what's next. We see
the work is never done, right?
Yeah, and DAM lends itself to that question, whether we're working in a museum and to go around and just ask the employees of a museum, of a movie studio, of a retailer, of some of the great food companies we've heard from, and ask the staff around there, what are people asking you? And I love that question, just asking someone, what are people asking you and that these technologies might be able to help with? So we've had some interesting questions come in. Okay. And I've got an inside and an outside question that come in. One on the inside is, how do people around Sony Pictures know about you and about this operation? Is there onboarding? Do you have some press and public relations, one of the billboards in Culver City? How do they hear about you?
Not exactly. I mean, we're available through the intranet sites and have links on that Sony site so that folks internally can find us. But a lot of the work is around evangelizing on our own, right? So, I mean, primarily our customers internally are going to be our feature films and our television programs. So whenever a new program starts up, we're connecting with that production to make sure that they're aware. And the heads of post-production on both the TV and the feature side are aware of that as well. And this is a tremendous cost saver for them, right? On the production side and on the post-production side. If you don't have to send a film crew to New York City, if you can just use something that already exists, that's great for the bottom line. So there's a lot of momentum internally around trying to drive people to use repurpose footage that we have if they can. And if we don't have something, then they'll go shoot it. And then that becomes an addition to the library 2 or 3 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. We had the same question. So if we were outside the lot in Culver City in a very beautiful area where you work when you're actually going to the office, we've had a question come in, well, how do people outside find this and know that this is there? And that could spill over into some of the other holdings, but would value your sharing an answer to that.
Yeah, that's a great question too. So we've taken different strategies over time. For us, our core customer base is primarily Hollywood and the entertainment industry in general. So our sales teams do a lot of proactive reaching out to other productions and using services that exist within the industry to identify when productions are spinning up, who the contacts in those productions might be, how you might reach out to the right person in editorial or post-production. We also do a lot of connecting with the heads of post-production of various groups, whether that be ad agencies, other studios, et cetera. We have not done it with our new site yet, but in the past we have had success simply with Google AdWords and doing some promotions through Google, trying to elevate our search through sponsored links. And then of course, SEO, which is always important. So, right now, because the site has only recently launched, our rankings are not as high as we would like. We'll continue to build on that and get them higher as time goes on, organic rankings. But you can do searching for things like movie film clips probably, or definitely Sony film clips, and you'll start to see links for a splash page for our film clip business. I'm sure if you search Sony stock footage right now, you'll end up with our page somewhere on the first page of results. And then events like this. Hey everyone, go to sonypicturesstockfootage.com if you need to license some stock footage.
Love that. We had some interesting questions come in about the AI in particular. Yeah. And I'm going to synthesize a couple of them and then run through a couple of them. First question, is the technology you're using based on image recognition or on text strings, a bit of both? Kind of take the covers back on where the recognition patterns are deriving from.
Sure. This solution is entirely text-based, and that was intentional given the problem we were trying to solve, and that we had a lot of good text-based records about this particular collection of content, and we wanted to be able to pull it together and add more cohesion to that collection and the data around that collection. For our film clip business and for our photos business, we do use some AI that is based around image recognition, facial recognition, also some speech to text, so analyzing the audio. So we've played around with all of those, but this particular solution is just a text-based solution.
I think either a first or a second cousin to this question. I'm not sure exactly what level of genetic relative we'd call it. How did you arrive at the comfort level for the accuracy requisite to be achieved for the content recommendations? What sort of boosted your confidence and the team's confidence in, yeah, this is really working for us, or we need to tune this here or there?
That's a great question. And I would say, as I mentioned earlier, that it's still a work in progress. That we saw very early on that we were going to be able to, that we were looking at existing keywords that had no relationships between them whatsoever, having then started to build those relationships, and then using the AI to start to basically automatically tag certain clips with the terms that existed in that taxonomy. It was really in doing just that first 100 clip test where we started to see in the results, because with 100 clips, you can actually dig into all of those results and spend some real time with them. It's not as overwhelming as trying to look at all 200,000 at the same time. That you could look at those initial results and go, huh, it added that term. Why did it do that? Oh, I get it. And yeah, that term is totally appropriate. Or, huh, it's adding these sorts of terms, and those might be a little bit too broad. So maybe how do we start to narrow the focus on how it is moving up and down the hierarchy of terms when we're tagging our assets with clips that exist within that full taxonomy. But it was pretty early on, to answer the question, I think most specifically, that first 100 clips or second 100 clips where you could start to see, huh, this is definitely giving us better results from an intellectual perspective. Then when we started to run searches through our database, through the website, you would start to see improved results. That was really the ultimate tipping point. That's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah. We've had some other technical questions come in, both on business operations. Well, I'm going to give you a pass on these, okay? So for those of you who are joining Jason and I in what could be a multi-hour conversation, we'll share the questions we don't have time to get to with Jason, and we'll get some answers back to you, because there's some questions, some more refined questions about some of the tool usage, and then several about the business itself. Yeah, which I think you'll enjoy seeing and have fun answering. But we had one come in that I'd like to end with, and that is, tell us a little bit about some unexpected patterns, or maybe some good guesses that you made as to some of the most popular assets that are recurringly being solicited or discovered and then repurposed. Sort of the ruby reds, to use the famous slippers analogy.
Yeah, that's a fun question, and we were looking at this not just probably 2, maybe 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Some of the most popular clips in the library that we have are actually clips that are public domain NASA footage that we pulled for a production ages ago from the archives and transferred to film and have in our library and make them available to license. And this old NASA stuff, it was amazing to see it pop up again and again and again in some of our searches. The other stuff that is really popular, or has been really popular over the last 3 to 6 months, will come as no surprise. It's medical footage. So it's the wheel of a gurney rolling on the ground. It's the shot of a hospital ER room that's sort of with all of the chaos going on in the distance. It's the empty hospital hallway. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a sign of our times and the type of content that's being created right now. If I were to look back at that same question 2-3 years ago, it would be a lot of New York aerials or Los Angeles establishing shots or, general sort of production type stuff. But I think because of the type of content that's being created today, I think that NASA footage, I mean, we went to Mars, or not Mars, sorry. We went to the, we had the SpaceX that went to, up to the space shuttle recently. I think that was maybe a little bit of an impetus for some of that content being pulled. And then of course the COVID crisis doing all the, bubbling up all the medical content. So yeah, that's a fun question.
It is. And what better question than to reveal that we can expect the unexpected with DAM. We can find boundaries completely being redefined in ways that we cannot anticipate. And by using contemporary technological tools to augment the depth and resilience and responsiveness of an asset, who knows what's going to be found next? And I love the uncertainty and the certainty of knowing we have to be persistent in our attention and keep working little by little, as you shared with us, on making the bigger big. So Jason, on behalf of the Festival of DAM and all of us at Henry Stewart and our peers gathered around the world to create the DAM community, thanks for your ongoing contributions. And if we could do this right now, I know that everyone would join me in a round of applause for you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.